Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism midweek special. I hope you and yours are well. This is going to be a lot of these specials. As you'll see, we've called this podcast the Voices of Liberate Scotland. You're all showing a lot of interest in this, and we want to give you more exposure to it. And you will also note this is for a certain blogger and one of his readers, not the leader. You'll see in my wee box there. So what I'm going to do is bring in my guests, starting with the leader of the ISP, Colette Walker, my friend. How are you?
Hello, Roddy. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm always well and better for seeing you.
Oh, of course you are.
A silver-tongued devil.
Is that £10 I owe you?
Yep. I've upped my charges for midweek shows. It's usually a quid, but you shouldn't have said a tenner. And up there in the Broch, maybe somewhere near the Broch, it's David McHutchon of Sovereignty. David, how are you?
I Peter Heed and near the Broch, but close enough. Yes, doing very well. How are you?
Very well. As long as you know in the big house up there, that's okay.
It's one step up from a wee tenement, so nothing to worry about there.
Yeah, nice to see you. And down there in Clickmannon, it's our Eva from Indie for Indie. How are you, Eva?
Hi, Roddy. Good to see everybody. Yeah, I'm doing well and looking forward to a healthy debate tonight. And it's great to be amongst friends and fellow travellers on the road to our country's independence.
Here. We've all got on different hats today. And of course, but we're all wearing the same one, which is, of course, Liberate Scotland. Well, everyone except me, that is. I'm totally neutral, as you know. So, Eva, if I may start with you, as I invariably do. Tell me, Eva, why did the crew and all the guys and gals in Indie for Indie decide they wanted to be under an umbrella and Liberate Scotland?
Well, it's no secret that the most amazing, energising, positive, engaging campaign in modern Scottish political times was the 2014 referendum campaign. And the reason why it was energetic and positive was because there was one thing and one principle alone on the line, and that was the question of self-determination and the regaining of Scotland's independence. Other differences were set aside, and the Yes campaign was powerful, and it was driven by the grassroots, by innumerable organisations under the Yes umbrella, and that umbrella worked exceptionally well. It was a very efficient way to proceed when all the energy was coming from the grassroots. You think back, you had pensioners for Yes, lawyers for Yes, all different organisations for Yes. You had obviously English people for Yes, Welsh for Yes, Labour for Yes, Tories for Yes. It was a fantastic way of people getting together, feeling positive, and at times various different events that took place were iconic. You look back on them, yes, with a degree of regret and some sorrow, but also with a huge amount of positive memory of what a people can do when we come together and we unite under a common banner for common purpose, because the common aim, the common purpose was independence for the betterment of our country. Think back, for example, to George Kempick. I had the great privilege of going with George when he was battling with Glasgow City Council regarding the route that his independence convoy would take through the city centre. We went into Glasgow City Chambers, we met a number of officials there, and eventually they saw the light and we got a decent route through the city centre for that freedom convoy. I was in several of them with Matt driving us, and driving on one occasion in particular, we started in Aberdeen and we drove down to Glasgow, and the atmosphere was indescribable because all the way down the road, other travellers were peeping and tooting, flashing, waving, folk were lining the streets. When we got into different villages and towns, the noise was at times ferocious, with people cheering and shouting and clapping, and you could see that the ordinary people of Scotland's imagination was captured by the music and the songs and the presence of so many of us gathered together in our thousands on some of these occasions and suddenly you knew that you were part of a movement that was rolling forwards. You know, it wasn't just a snowball running down a hill or a boulder catching the energy and flying downhill. It was a whole people that were determined to see something different happen in our land. And if also remember, Chris Law did the Spirit of Independence too. People loved that. Bob Costello, he was involved in these things too with his buses. And there were innumerable individuals throughout Scotland who made their own efforts, people that were painting stones, you had folk dancing, you had butterflies for yes, all different sorts of stalls and things being sold, bags and T-shirts and, you know, just an awful lot of positivity where people were determined to get the message across, and they used a number of different methods to do that. Although social media was catching on then, we weren't really so heavily into Twitter or X in those days. It was Facebook. And every time you looked at Facebook, you saw gatherings of people, whether it was folks standing at bridges with their snow tyres or in George Square on so many memorable occasions, especially the night before the referendum. And you could see that there was real joy and real optimism throughout the land. That spirit, that emotion, that love for our country, that hope for our people, that optimism can be, and I believe is being reborn in Liberate Scotland, because the common denominator amongst us all is we want to see Scotland free, not a desert. So that's why I'm part of Eye for Eye and Liberate Scotland, because I don't care what your views and your beliefs are. If you want to travel with me towards that free destination and regain the freedom of our country, I'm your friend and we'll walk together side by side. I don't appear here tonight as a leader, Roddy. I appear here as a member of Eye for Eye and Liberate Scotland, a participant, because we're all in this together. None of us is any better or any worse than the other. We're all equal to each other because we have one common goal, which we are determined to deliver. It's caught the public's imagination again, and I'm delighted that we're able to do that and look forward very, very much between now and May next year to creating or continuing to create the structure and the processes and the plans and the proposals and the events, the debates, the chapping doors, going to every part of the country to deliver the message that we need next year's election to be run on Liberate Scotland lines, and deliver that one line: independence, nothing less; independence, nothing else. And once we are independent, by goodness, how Scotland will rise. So that's why I am part, and very pleased to be part of this organisation.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff, Eva. Colette, why did you and the ISP decide that you want to be under the umbrella? What was it that excited you about
it? Well, as you know, in 2020 we set up ISP so that we could be a regional list party, and we worked on a strategy to get a supermajority through our voting system. Because we knew in 2021 we thought it was going to be the biggest election that we probably really have ever had. Obviously, we'd had the Brexit vote, etc. So one of my main passions is education and social care. And we were seeing how Brexit was actually affecting that significantly. So we thought 2021 was actually going to be a really crucial election. So we were wanting to make sure that we tried to get as many independent supporting MSPs within our parliament so that we could do something constructive, like hold a plebiscite. Because due to our Deont system, it's not a one-party basis model. You really do need the regional list to actually top up a party that's going to take the majority of constituency seats. We've seen that since the devolution of Holyrood, where Labour were, first of all, the leading constituency holders, and the SNP and independent candidates, etc., SSP, were taking up the region. And then the SNP then took over the constituency, and then it was over to the likes of Labour and the Tories, Lib Dems, etc. But it didn't go, obviously, the way we wanted it. We stood down for Alapa when they launched, because, again, we are a completely grassroots party. It was country before party or person. So we decided to stand down and hopefully let ALPA have a better chance at it with having Alex Salmond at the helm. It didn't go in our favour. So over the past 4 years, we've seen Scotland basically being sold out. I've been, as you know, I've been working very heavily with the Salvo Freeports team over the past couple of years. We've been travelling the country, trying to educate people on exactly what's happening with the 2 free ports that we've got in the Cromarty Firth and the Firth of Forth, and also the special economic zones we've got in Glasgow and the North East. Because it's not being recognised, it's not being acknowledged, it's not being informed to the nation exactly what these areas are actually doing to Scotland. So leading up to next year's election, with everything that we now know about privatisation on steroids, our natural resources being sold off, and we're actually paying more for them. And also what Eva speaks about very, very several times on the Prism about Grangemouth, and now we've got Alexander Dennis shutting down, again, both in Freeport areas. And I put up today regarding one of the companies, a Canadian company, that actually own part of the Forth Freeport, and also the area of Dennis, Alexander Dennis. So things aren't going really the way that we were promised with free ports. So privatisation is decimating Scotland and our economy, and it's not going to help our standard of living, and it's not going to help our local councils either. So next year, if we do not make a stance and we don't get people to go out and vote and make the change that is desperately needed, then we won't have a Scotland to fight for after 2026. It's getting that serious. So it is country before party, before person. It's about everybody who I call entered the apathy party. They've all now turned their heads away. They're sick of typical politicians who they feel that tell them lies all the time. Not saying everybody does. There is some good politicians out there, but they are getting sick of it. They're disengaging. And as Eva rightly said, now that we are coming together, and we've heard for over the years, oh, why can't you put your differences aside? Why can't you all work together? Well, we have actually listened to you, and we have now came together. So now we're asking you to support the work that we are willing to do, the hard graft that we are willing to do for this whole campaign for this next year. But we need this extra piece of the jigsaw, and that's the voters to come out and campaign with us. Like Eva was saying, get them galvanised, get them out, get them on the stalls, get them chapping on doors, but crucially putting that mark on the ballot papers next year and actually making a difference to our parliament. Because if we don't, I don't want a unionist parliament, and I don't want Scotland's economy decimated. So we're coming together, putting all our differences aside, just so that we're in that parliament and we can secure Scotland's future.
You're on mute, Roddy.
I owe myself a quid.
No, can I have my £10 back?
No, sorry, no refunds, love. you should know me by now, Colette. David, the same question to you. Why did Sovereignty decide to join this coalition of parties and individuals and groupings?
Well, for us, Liberate Scotland is one of the most exciting initiatives in recent years within the independence movement. So it was actually a fairly easy decision for us. You know, you put a lot of work in politics as a volunteer in building the brand, you know, building up your branch network, working with members and so on. It's a huge amount of work. Far from being a gravy bus, this for us is actually a lot of graft. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. And so, you know, we're actually quite proud of what we have achieved with Sovereignty, becoming a very distinctive voice for the double out position in Scotland. But our concern primarily has always been for independence. And we are confident. I think all of us around the table would be confident here that if 2014 was to be repeated and we were to have a referendum on Scottish independence tomorrow, we would win. And we would win. If you think 2014 was following all of that effort and that grassroots initiative, those brilliant campaigns described by Eva, we would win from standing start if it was a flash vote. I am absolutely convinced. So support for independence has been growing on a secular basis. It's been growing over the longest term horizon. It's something that is incredibly encouraging. But just at the point when support for independence is really getting that sort of like hockey stick growth, and it's going through the roof, and it's reaching all parts of Scotland. It's reaching all different segments of Scottish society, people with different ideological outlooks, people working in different trades and industries, people with different backgrounds. Just at that very point, there has never been less institutional support from the SNP for actually getting independence done. It is a major betrayal of the independence movement, what is happening at the moment. And unless we are standing, I would never consider saying we're splitting the vote with a gradualist, right? If someone, it's not even that we have gradualists at the moment, we have glacialists, we have petrified, fossilized members of the independence movement that maybe somewhere way back there have something of a memory of what it was like to actually believe that Scotland could become independent. But the reality is they're doing nothing. They're pleading every election for a mandate that they are not using. And this is a betrayal. It's a betrayal of the independence movement. It's a betrayal of our desire for self-determination. It's a betrayal of our desire to be free from Westminster rule. But it's also a betrayal of democracy, because Scottish voters are going to the polls in election after election, knowing one thing only, universally about the SNP, and that is that they're supposed to be a pro-independence party. They're voting for that, and they're not getting independence. So it is time that a movement, a party, as it has become, and a coalition, as it is operating as well at this moment, is going to hold the SNP's foot to the fire. It's time that we have enough of this situation where the SNP rhetorically have got their foot on the gas, and at the same time, constitutionally, in terms of actual action, they are not pushing SNP forward. They're pushing the SNP forward. They're not pushing independence forward. That has to change. And the only way that it can happen is by getting real pressure onto the quote-unquote pro-independence parties by offering a real alternative, an alternative comprised of a coalition of parties that genuinely believe in Scottish independence, and moreover, they actually have a solid strategical basis for how it might be achieved. And I believe we have that. I believe that the initiatives that we are connected with going to the UN initiating the process surrounding the decolonization of Scotland, the the openness that we have to a constitutional convention, the openness that we have, if necessary, if all else fails, and if we have a democratic mandate, even going to the point of unilaterally declaring independence, and other elements to the strategy as well. But we actually have a concrete direction as a movement of how we can achieve independence. So this is missing from the SNP, but it's not missing from Liberate Scotland. And that's why it was a no-brainer for us to get involved. So it is an organization, it is a movement that we believe is open to everyone within the independence movement, and can really come to galvanize and bring us together, galvanize the movement, and help us actually transfer that support, that large and growing support for Scottish independence that we are seeing in the Scottish electorate, Scottish population at large, into concrete action, because that's what this is all about. It's not about taking a seat in Holyrood. It is not about any sort of profile. None of us, I think, want any sort of profile for ourselves. We're all very happy with our lives and so on. It is about getting independence happening for the people of Scotland. And that is why it was an absolute no-brainer for Sovereignty to reach out to Liberate Scotland in order to see what we could do to help and support. And we're delighted to be working together with I4I, with ISP, and who knows who else. Anyone in Scotland that believes in Scottish independence should get involved in this initiative. There are lots of different ways to do that, I'm sure, as you'll go into, Roddy, but join the parties, join the grouping, support your local candidate, stand if you feel like you have something to offer in that area. And together, I think we will, as Eva, I believe it was you were saying, we will not just recover the spirit of 2014, but we will discover something hopefully better and greater, spirit of 2026. And that is what it's going to be all about. It's time to get behind this movement. You know, we've sacrificed some of our ambitions and plans with regards to the election, because ultimately what we would like to do is see independence be front and center. Independence, nothing less, nothing else. That is what has to be front and center of this election campaign. And we're going to do everything within our power to make sure that that is the case.
Well said, sir. Absolutely. Well done. Well done. And that's what David said, what Colette said, what Eva said, folks. If you've got to get involved, we can't do this on our own. Believe me, we're putting in the shift, we're doing the work. But throughout the night here, we're going to put up the different emails to the different parties that are in the coalition. Get in touch. And as David says, whether it's, you know, you want to be a candidate, whether you want to knock on doors, because we'll come on to that in a minute about the campaigning app we've got, whether you want to, you know, stick things in envelopes, whether you want to put a post on your window, whether you want to throw a fiver here or there, whatever it is you want to do, we need the whole nation, the whole pro-independence nation to get behind this. Techie, can you stick up let's start with Indie for Indie. I'm pulling rank here. I'm a wee bit of favouritism. Allowed that. You can get in touch with me here at Indie for Indie if you're going to get involved, and if you're in an area where one of our colleague parties here are standing, we'll redirect you. But there's what you can get. And as this show's going out, or this podcast is going out all the time, Techie will be putting up all the other ones as well as we go along. So that's what we'll do. Moving on, Eva, if I could, because it's been mentioned as one of the ones, is we've seen it on social media, is you know, you're splitting the vote. Well, we're not splitting the vote, are we? In fact, we're trying not to split the vote. It's others that are splitting the vote.
I take this rather personally, Roddy, because you know a bit of my pedigree. I was an SNP councillor in the 1990s, but I've campaigned for Scottish independence since I was literally a primary school child. My parents helped to run the Creef branch of the SNP in the 1960s. It is part of my life. It always has been. And I do take offence when people refer to me as a splitter, because nothing could be further from the truth. It's like the Jimmy Reid line. He didn't leave the Labour Party left him. The reason I joined ALBA in 2021 was not just because I would have followed Alex Salmond in those days to the ends of the earth, but it was because I agreed with the strategy that had been enumerated previously by Colette and the ISP, that you needed to have a list party with a real presence to be able to create that supermajority within the Scottish Parliament. So this exercise of Liberate Scotland builds upon that work that the ISP did and that ALBA have set out in 21 and have been trying to do since, about a collective approach towards the desired common outcome. And in terms of statistics, let's just think about the numbers. And what we know is the electorate of Scotland is around about, for the Scottish elections, because remember it's a different franchise for the Scottish elections than it is for Westminster, the electorate is of the order of 4.25 million. Okay? In the referendum, around about 3.6 million voted. The SNP and the other independent supporting parties have less than 100,000 members. The people that are complaining about Liberate Scotland, in their view, splitting the vote, are a very small minority of the membership of those independent supporting parties, because they are making the mistake of putting party before country. This is about maximising the vote for independence. And if you join Liberate Scotland, and if you vote for Liberate Scotland candidates in the constituency and we don't succeed, we need your votes on the list to get in. But the reason why that's different from an SNP vote 1 and an SNP vote 2 is that the SNP have a majority on the constituencies. And because they're almost a shoo-in in the constituencies, that by itself, when you give your second vote on the list to the SNP, guarantees unionists get in on the list. Colette spotted that years ago. Alex Salmond followed through on that, and we understand about it. It's why you need to have a collective approach, and you have to look at what your goal is. And if your goal is a majority of the popular vote for independence, and if your goal is a majority of MSPs who support independence, you will never get that by voting for the majority party on the constituency, also on the list. That's what will split the vote, and that's what will bring unionists into the parliament. The statistics are all there. The people who profess that the statistics are wrong are putting country after party when it should be the other way around. Now, a few more statistics for you. If voting SNP gets you independence, why did it not happen in 2015, 16, 17, 19? You know, all the other times that the SNP have had a mandate for independence, they're sitting on a mandate for independence now in the Scottish Parliament. We hear every week Phil Boswell speaks about being part of the cohort of 2015 who got down to Westminster and he was rolling his sleeves up thinking, right then, let's get torn into them because we're here to seek the independence of our country. And it didn't happen. And now we've got a position where the SNP are talking about independence again for two reasons. One, because there's an election coming up, and two, because they're rattled. They're rattled by Liberate Scotland. And when I say the SNP, I mean the leadership. I don't mean the grassroots, the members, the supporters. I don't mean the former MPs and former MSPs, if you like, the old guard that I looked up to in 1992 when I first stood for election. That old guard understand the SNP 1 and 2 doesn't work. They understand the beauty of the Liberate Scotland strategy. You know, as I've said already, the strategy that Colette and Alec previously set out. And what folk have to get to grips with completely is that Liberate Scotland is not about bums on seats. It's about votes. It's about showing to the world and showing to Westminster and showing to the unionist parties that Scotland has a majority in favour of independence, and therefore the Scottish people have a right to be independent. And that will not happen if people fall for the old chestnut that's been rolled out time after time after time. You have to split your vote up between different organisations and different groups to get the result that Scotland needs, that Scotland will benefit from. And that's where Liberate Scotland not only comes into its own, but it does what I said earlier. It captures the imagination, because we explain to people that if you do it our way, independence will be the winner. Scotland will be the winner. To a great extent, it won't matter terribly much who's actually elected as individual MSPs. What matters are the numbers. And if we can stand up there the day after the election and say, majority popular vote, majority of seats, super majority of seats for independence, that is the message Westminster needs to hear, because that authorises us, it legalises us, it gives us the legitimate right to talk in terms of negotiating how we then proceed with the terms of the independence settlement. And the world's eyes will be upon us in a way that they'll never be upon us if what people do is bow down to the SNP 1 and 2 mantra. And the proof of the pudding is this. For the last 10 days, 2 weeks, you've had John Swinney talk over and over again about independence as if it's a new word that's just come into his lexicon. Well, I knew John a wee bit 20, 30 years ago, and the John Swinney of those days wouldn't speak like the John Swinney of these days, because long ago he was a major fan of independence. Now he seems to have lost his bottle. And I would like to be wrong, but I sincerely believe that if he wants independence, the way that he'll achieve it, how he'll go about it, is that he will lift the phone to other independence supporters, whether it's Colette, David, Kenny McCaskill, some of the wider world, the civic nationalists, if you like. I mean, if you look behind me, I've got books there by... Sorry, but we've got an echo. Is it you, Colette? Could you go on mute? I've got books behind me by Grice Peter, Leslie Riddoch, Jim Sillars, Paul Colvin, the poet, Charlie Macaulay Robertson, another poet. These are all people who've got a lot to say about independence. They all individually see the beauty of spreading your support around different independence candidates. These people understand that. And that's what the people of Scotland need to cling on to. That those who are not standing for election because they want to be MSPs, the people that want to see independence, they support the notion of Liberate Scotland because it is the answer. It's the answer to everything. That is why we're getting a bit of the stick that we're getting now from people with vested interests who want to remain on the gravy train and who thought that becoming an MSP was a job for life within the SNP, when what would they've been there to deliver all along is independence, which they can deliver if they join with us. If they do not join with us, if they continue to go down the road that they're going, well, you know, if the carrot fails, sometimes you have to use the stick. And I don't want to be using the stick against fellow independent supporters, but I want to see an SNP that does what it says on the tin, which is promote all Scottish interests at every opportunity and promote and attain the independence of our country. Because it is only with independence and the full levers, the full economic levers, full powers, that we'll be able to do all the things that we want to do. So independence, nothing less, independence, nothing else, unity from dawn till dusk. And we will do what Tommy Sheridan spoke about the night before the referendum. We'll make sure the night before polling day that we're able to say next May, they said a while ago Scotland had 10 years of oil left. Well, the UK's now got 10 hours.
Yeah, a great line then, it'll be a great line again. But as Eva said there, you know, people are standing under the Liberate Scotland banner are not there to get bums on seats. It's to get bums off of seats. That's why we're doing it. Get the bums off and out of that parliament and let's get our independence. One of the things that we've noticed, Colette, is that in 2024 there, when we had the general election, we know it wasn't a Labour landslide. It was people saying on the apathy party, as you often put it. But we know that more people who normally vote for independence stayed at home. Now, they're the people that we're looking for. They're the people that we need to get back voting. 750,000 pro-independent supporters didn't bother going to the polls in July last year. They need enthused, and only independence soothes them.
Yeah, but I think we've seen it since near enough. Well, I definitely saw it in 2023 when I stood in the Rutherglen and Hamilton by-election, that the SNP usual voters, independent voters, and even SNP members at that time, because of what was actually happening within that constituency, just weren't coming out to vote. And again, you know, we got the split in the vote. We got it, you know, when we stood down in 2021 and Alapa took over. Again, it was the same thing, you're splitting the vote. But in 2023, we got accused of that as well. But what I was hearing from the people that were actually coming out said that if I hadn't been standing, then they wouldn't have came out to vote at all. So the actual numbers would have been less than what they were for people actually not going out to vote at all, because they just weren't going to vote for SNP. So we're actually giving them that strong alternative to do that. And as you say, then leading to 2024 in the general election, yes, okay, we stood, but, you know, ISP had a completely different policy. It wasn't really our election. We weren't there to actually win. It was more to promote the party. We took that opportunity. But again, you saw that only 9 SNP MPs were elected. That was a major blow to the SNP, not to have those people going out to actually vote for them, to give them yet another mandate. So they lost that. And a few are now going to be standing next year. But we, as you say, we need to get people galvanised. As I said earlier on, there's so many people that are just so disengaged with politics. They're looking away, things are happening, and it's only when it starts to affect them within their household and their families are affected, they'll then say, oh, how did that happen? When did that happen? Well, it was when you weren't paying attention and when you didn't actually use your vote to actually make the change. So, yeah, we need to get people who, one, are independent supporters who are wanting Scotland liberated away from this fiction of a union. But also, as David rightly said as well, and you know, Eva's summed up very nicely, that the will for our independence, for Scotland to be free, has actually increased. But the will to vote for the SNP has decreased significantly. So we do need a strong alternative, and that's what we're giving them. And we do need people to come out and vote. We can't just have elections with 20-30% going out to vote. Now, the vote there a couple of weeks ago in Hamilton, Stonehouse and Larkhall, it's 44%, but it really wasn't, again, independent supporters that were going out. It was unionist supporters that were going out. The independent supporters were not going out to vote. Now, we got, as I say, when I stood in Rutherglen, they kept saying, oh, well, if you didn't stand, Katie would, you know, she would have got your votes. Well, that, again, as I said earlier on, that's not true, because they said, a lot of people said if I hadn't stood, they just wouldn't have been out to vote. But there was 14 candidates standing in that by-election, and a couple of independent candidates. So there was myself and probably another 4 that were supposedly independent supporting candidates. Now, if you added up all our votes together and gave them to Katie, she would have still have lost by about 7,000 votes. There was no way we were at any point ever splitting her vote. We were giving people a reason to go out and actually use their right to vote. But as Eva said just there about the Dion system and how about splitting the vote as well, in 2016, the SNP, because they started taking over the constituencies, they got 4 regional list seats, 4 out of 56 that are available. In 2021, because they insisted on an SNP 1 and 2, they got over 1 million votes. Because I actually done a lot of statistics, and I put up a lot on social media recently with outlining the whole, like, through the 2016-2021 numbers. And to get over 1 million votes for the SNP in the regional list in 2021, they lost 2 seats. So they only got 2 regional seats. Now, if you can imagine, if they'd actually just stood down and didn't stand anybody in the region for the SNP and allowed Alapa, and possibly the Greens, some people think the Greens are slightly independent supporting, but say, for example, Alapa, if you had given that to Alapa, they would have won a considerable amount of seats within the region. So, you know, the best thing, that probably the healthiest thing, is that the SNP could have worked with ALAPA or even worked with ISP before ALAPA came along and said, we won't stand because we understand the voting system, but they didn't. So really, at the end of the day, people are totally disengaged. They're not interested, but we need to get that back together. We need people out. We need them campaigning. And as I say, if we don't, then, you know, we're the only ones that can make the change. And we're the only ones that can actually prevent a unionist parliament coming up. And as what David said earlier on, you know, we need to show international recognition with what's happening with the UN and the decolonisation. We need to show countries that we have the civic and political will and be internationally recognised in the first place. And the only way we can do that is by people voting Liberate Scotland candidates.
Here. And in fact, I should just say, and it's an ISP Liberate Scotland candidate who will be standing in Hamilton next year. So we'll be there. But that's the thing. In Hamilton, we ran the numbers on it, and Christine McKelvey, when she was elected in 21, she had 16,000 votes. They only get 7,900 at the by-election. So over 8,000 SNP voters stayed at home because, in that good Scottish word, David, they're scunnered. Absolutely scunnered. Now, a lot of people are also saying, David, and how do you answer? They're saying, oh, you're gaming the system if you do this by cooperating and not standing against each other. We're getting, on one side, we're getting told that we're splitting the vote, and others are saying we're gaming the system. But I maintain, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but when they set the parliament up, the British Unionists, they gamed the system. That's why we've got the voting system we have, because they were determined it couldn't be a one party winning an outright majority, but they hoped it would always be two unionist party and they would infinitum always rule. So we're not gaming the system. They gamed the system. We're just trying to work it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. I would say it's absolutely the case. I mean, we're all saying it, and I think a lot of grassroots supporters across the movement have been saying it until they're blue in the face. Having the SNP as the only pro-independence party of any size, of any electability within the movement is we're cruising for a bruising if we keep going that way.
Yep.
It may have worked, in one very, very exceptional election, but it's not going to work ordinarily. Do you ever hear unionists fretting about the fact that their vote's going to be split three ways or now four with reform? You don't. And for a very good reason. So we need to have a little bit more strategic nous here. There's nothing wrong with that. These are the cards that we've been dealt. How are we going to play them? And so I think one of the ways of looking at this that's really important is this isn't just about being cynical. I'm not entirely sure how you rephrased it, but this idea that somehow we're just trying to engineer a situation that artificially represents what the Scottish public really is looking for. It's about actually offering the people of Scotland a genuine choice, because the choice at this election will be between the SNP that nominally believes in independence and don't get me wrong, very, very many ordinary supporters, grassroots activists within the SNP are fully 100% committed to independence. They share our frustration, but the choice will be between an SNP that on an institutional level is only nominally committed to independence, but whenever an opportunity to actually deploy effective strategies that are going to move independence forward comes along, they balk at it, or they even frustrate the efforts of those that are trying to achieve it. So that will be one alternative. The other alternative will be to vote for, sorry to use the word, but hardline pro-independent supporters that genuinely believe that A, this is the right thing, B, that this is an achievable thing, and C, that this is the best thing for the people of Scotland. So that will be the choice of the election. And it's for this reason, I believe, that it's a no-brainer for us to stand in the constituencies and on the list. If we only stood on the list, the SNP would feel no pressure whatsoever from that. Because they're not going to lose anything anyway in that case. It's only by standing in the constituencies that all of a sudden they will start to notice the fact that they haven't really done anything with all of those mandates that they've been given by the Scottish electorate. I come back to it. I hate repeating myself on this point, but support for independence is growing. And it's growing in a structural fashion. It's not just we've had one, polling opinion poll that was on a secular basis, it is growing. And so it is incumbent upon the independence movement to offer, through a vehicle such as Liberate Scotland, an alternative, genuine choice for those that actually want to see progress being made, that don't want the rhetoric, that don't want the false promises, that don't want the hopium of the later Sturgeon years, but actually want to see real action. That's where Liberate Scotland comes in, and that's why we're appealing to everyone listening to this show to get behind the movement in some way or another, join one of the parties, contact us on the 3 email address. Yeah, you can write to all 3 of us. You don't need to pick. But get involved, because there is a shed load of work to be done between now and May 2026. But we can do this. ISP, you had a bit more of a run-in, but definitely Sovereignty and Alaba, we were coming into that election in 2021 with very, very little time. This will be different. This is going to be, you're drawing on a lot more organizational nous and experience here from the different parties, a lot more understanding of campaigning and canvassing from folks like Eva and Roddy. You're drawing on a huge pool of I would say, organizational support. So it is hopefully, we would imagine, going to be run considerably more professionally than anything that we've seen done previously. But what is the purpose? I come back to it. The purpose is to offer the people of Scotland a genuine choice at the elections next year, the opportunity to vote for a party that is going to push independence forward, if necessary, by declaring independence, and then we will see what happens at that point. But it is absolutely the case that this is within our gift to do it. The pressure is not growing on us. The pressure at this point is growing on Westminster, because they're seeing these numbers coming in as well. They know that the UK is a failed state. They know that it is letting Scottish families down massively. And they know that Scottish independence offers, for us as a people, the opportunity for a fresh start. So I would say this is one of the most exciting moments in terms of, our history as a movement, this precise moment. And you have the opportunity, if you're, and you must be politically involved or engaged if you're listening to Barhead Boy and Roddy and Prism. So I'll take that as a given. So get involved, get active, and we can actually really shake up Scottish politics in a massive way in 2026. It's within your hands. It's within your gift to do.
Yeah, absolutely is. And it doesn't matter, as I said earlier, how little you think you can do or you're able to do. As they say in Scotland, that great phrase, many a mickle makes a muckle. So everybody can, if you're breathing, you can do something. But it reminds me, actually, of going back to, it was actually 2016, while I was still an SNP man of 4 decades and more, when John, one of our techies, said, we need a Barhead Independence Party, because he's a great man for the numbers, and he looked at it and said, we can never do it with one party. And that's the fact, which brought us on, and that was a long route how we got round to campaigner, Eva, because the way we're going to do it in Liberate Scotland is to level the playing field. It was the boys and girls in Prism, Indie for Indie, who developed the campaigner app, because the only way to do this is to get on the doorsteps and talk to people. They've got the television studios, they've got the media, but we've got the campaigner app and we've got the boots.
Absolutely. And I make a personal pledge to every part of Scotland, everybody who's watching. I'm more than happy to come and speak out in the streets of your town or your village, or in your village halls, at your bowling clubs, at your community centres, and speak about the need for independence and why it must be independence, nothing less. Because this campaign that we're on must be transformational. We must change Scotland, and we must do it in next year's election, because as Colette said in her opening remarks, if we don't do it then, what Scotland will be left to us? We will become that Scotland free or a desert. That self-fulfilling prophecy will come to pass. And in terms of campaigner is about identifying support. It's about motivating support. It's about being able to go back and say to people, we know that you'd said to us a couple of weeks ago you were in favour of independence. Here's a leaflet, here's a poster. Would you like to join us? Would you like to talk to your next door neighbour? Do you want to come and campaign with us? Because remember, every single independentista has her and his part to play. Nothing is too big, nothing is too small, nobody is too young, nobody is too old. Every single member of our movement has a bounden duty and an ability to give something to the drive for independence, because independence is a beautiful thing. Freedom, as William Wallace spoke about. There is nothing greater than the freedom to run your own country the way that the people who live in that country want it to be run. And campaigner opens that door. It means that actually campaigning for the liberty of our country is something that can be in the hands of every man, woman, girl and boy in the country. We can all be going out there campaigning regularly. You can do a little bit every night, or you can blast it once every couple of weeks. But using campaigner and getting some data fed back into central banks is going to give us the information that we need to win this, to get the vote out for independence, so that we build that campaign together and we get the result that we need, that Scotland desperately needs. Voter identification, voter persuasion, and get the vote out on the day. Campaigner will do what Alex Salmond spoke about the 2014 referendum doing. I'm sure everybody here and most of the folk watching heard his story about being in Dundee a few weeks before the election, and there was a queue right round the street and beyond. I think up Reform Street, somewhere like that, and into the city square. And he was, what are these folk doing here? And asked a guy who was there, who said, oh, we're here about the vote. And what do you mean about the vote? It's not for another 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it was. And the guy said, no, we're here to register, because most of us haven't been registered since the days of the poll tax. That's what we need to see again. Voter apathy, like we just saw in that last by-election, or as Colette was talking about in that other one. That's got to be a thing of the past. I mean, voter engagement in 2014 was over 80%. That's what we need this time round. We need to rocket forwards and upwards with the people that actually are motivated to come out, vote for Liberate Scotland people, vote for independence, and then deliver independence, nothing less. And campaigner is the key.
Correct. And we are, as we can say, I mean, collective here, we're a few hundred people. There are 5.2 million people in Scotland. We want to be speaking to as many of them as we can. So we need your help. Remember that. Don't sit and go, yes, it's great, and clap. I was so inspired. Well, get inspired enough to come and help. Every little bit helps. I can't say it enough. If you remember Colette back in 2014, Margot said the famous thing, convince one of your friends and you'll double the vote. If we all convince one person, and that's what we need to do. We need to be going out there on the door and convincing one more person.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that I heard, especially in the last by-election there, is a lot of voters saying that nobody was going round the doors. They weren't going and chapping on doors. They hadn't seen, heard of anybody, maybe possibly Reform or Labour. But I really don't think a lot of people were saying many other candidates chapping on doors. And I think, again, the activists just weren't going out, especially for, sadly, the SNP. So really, I think people need to, a bit like what I said earlier on, the electorate, the voters have been asking for politicians to put their differences aside, work together, come together, so that we can actually achieve something. And as I said earlier on, we're actually doing that. So actually to be going round the doors or holding stalls and using the campaigner, well, you're at the stalls or all under one banner, rally, you know, speak to everybody that's coming. Okay, we might be speaking to the converted because that's why they're on the rallies. But if they feel that we are actually engaging with them, and I think that's really, really important, is that the average voter out there who is, again, thinking that politicians don't really care, they're just all in it for the one thing, if they see that the grassroots movement is actually still here and it's thriving, it's growing, and we're actually listening to them, and we're actually trying to make a difference for them and their families and their community, and they feel as if they've been listened to, I think that makes a huge difference. You know, I do a lot of campaigning, whether it's the free ports, and again, what you said earlier on there, Roddy, regarding tell one person, they'll pass it on. That's exactly what's been happening with the free ports. When we started the free ports a couple of years ago, we had a handful of people coming to our first meeting in Inverness. People went away angry because they started to find out information that they had no knowledge of. So they were going to go then and speak to their family, their friends, and get them engaged. Okay, the numbers to the public meetings might not be exactly where we might want them to be, but our social media interaction is quite phenomenal, and people are waking up because we're engaging with people. We are trying to inform them of what's happening. We're also asking for their opinion, their views. We're listening to them, and that is really, really important. And again, just like I co-chair a policy group within Liberate Scotland, and we've had a couple of big campaigns, and one of them started just in April with the concession card that visually impaired and blind people get for the +1. Now, normally a visually impaired and blind person would get on a bus and a ferry with a companion free, but not on a train. And it caused a whole load of issues with not being able to get that on a train. Now, we campaigned for about maybe 2 years, and we spoke to the Scottish Government, we lobbied, etc. And eventually and now we've got a pilot scheme for the next year to see how it actually goes. So we feel as if we were listened to. Our voices were heard, and we actually did achieve something for the visually impaired and blind community. That's exactly where we are now with Liberate Scotland. We are wanting to listen to the views, and that's where the campaigner comes in. We can actually ask a couple of very, very specific questions in your area, in your constituency, in your region, and we'll gather up that information, and we can use it to our own good and benefit to the voters. So it is about engaging, it's about listening, it's about talking to each other, and actually, as you say, one person going and saying, oh, have you heard about them? Oh no, I haven't heard, I'll have a wee look, I'll look them up, and then they pass on the message. So very effective, but engagement is the key thing to do just now.
Absolutely. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen who are watching this, if you were all to knock on 10 Scottish doors a week between now and polling day, we would hit every door in Scotland. Just 10 doors. That'd be it. But on that, David, we're going to teach people might, oh, I don't think I could do that. It's actually quite easy. We're going to teach people. We'll go around the country with campaigner and teach people how to knock on doors. It's the most important and best way for us to get votes. And I know people will be nervous of it, David, but it really isn't that bad, is it?
No, absolutely not. And I certainly, it's important for for us as an organization to have good social media, to have an accessible website and so on. But there is no substitute for spending time talking to your fellow Scots. There is no other way that gets rid of the mediation, the controlled media space that we basically have in Scotland, you know, where a certain view of ourselves, but controlled from Westminster, is regurgitated constantly and fed to the Scottish people. Now, one thing I would say just about speaking to people going around the doorsteps in Scotland is don't ever get nervous or feel like you're just wasting your time if you are speaking to a unionist, even a convinced unionist. Because I know plenty of people that were once upon a time unionists, may have grown up in a unionist family. And I think it's really, really important as well, if you have that opportunity, if you're out campaigning, to be able to explain to folk why it is that Scotland should be independent, and why it is for them in in the cases of so many unionists, they really do feel Scottish more than British. I mean, you have to keep trying to feel British in some way. You know it should make sense, but actually, when push comes to shove, it's ultimately Scottish that you feel, and you're viewed by other people if you've traveled the world, as I have a fair amount. You're viewed as Scottish, and that's extraordinary. You know, we haven't had our own state for over 300 years, and yet wherever I go in the world, people say, "Oh, Scottish accent. Oh, you're Scotch. You're Scottish. Whatever it is." And that speaks to the power of Scottish national identity. That speaks to the power of our shared history, our common story as a people, our self-identification, that the rest of the world is recognizing that in us. And we're seeing, I think, and we will see definitely as independence draws closer, a concerted attack on institutions that are distinctively Scottish. But I would, you know, we shouldn't be too worried about this in the sense that, you know, our identity as a people has survived over 300 years despite everything, despite the constant assaults on it, and despite the attempt to create an artificial British identity to replace what we are as a people and to try and diminish our story. So get ready for those conversations as well, because those could be, well, how much more satisfying how satisfying would it be, you know, going on the doorsteps, speaking with someone that is a unionist. You know, I'll just give you one example of someone I know, ex-unionist, and it was actually looking into Scottish history, looking into the history of the McGregors and how they were basically trophy hunted, essentially. That but that was the thing. That was the moment that Eva's pointing at herself here. That was the moment, basically, of a realization. No, the only way to secure our future is by having an independent Scottish state. So, so yeah, I will. I'm relishing those conversations. I love speaking with unionists. At the end of the day, there are fellow Scots, and after independence, you know, we are one people, and we're going to have to get along. And it certainly will be hard for some unionists, but I think it's really, really important that we are willing to have conversations with those that are clinging on to the last dying embers of the failing British state, and say it's okay to let go. You can let go.
Yeah, it is. And I would just like to say, as a purist who's never been anything but pro-independence, since I voted, I have never voted anything else. I'm proud to say that. David's absolutely right. And if you think, well, it's not for me, or the old legs won't do it, or I can't get up the stairs, or whatever, don't worry, we'll find a job for you. We'll find something for you to do. There's lots of jobs and lots of things to be done. Now, I hope this has been a wee taster for you folks and you've enjoyed it as much as actually I've enjoyed hosting it. And we'll have more. We're going to bring more and more of the candidates are fantastic, as you'll see when they come, and they're all the same. They're not looking for a seat or a bowl of gravy. They're looking for independence. No one said, no, I can honestly say any of the ones we spoke to said, what's the wages again? And how much do you get if you're on a committee? Nothing of that. Not interested. We want independence, nothing else. And there was one person said to me, well, what happens if you don't get enough? Well, I was thinking about the cup final recently when Aberdeen were doing. A lot of people must have said, yeah, you've not got a chance. Celtic are on a roll again. They're, on for their 4th treble. What's the point? What are you going down for? They won. Because unless you're in it, and we're in it to win it. We're in it to win it. 50% plus 1 seats, 50% plus 1 vote, and we're declaring independence. Mark my words. Till we see you and yours again, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.